What about very interesting? What about this little take from Michael Knowles in his book, where he puts a kind of conservative spin on free speech? It may be more of a spin than anything else. Maybe it's just definition. But he says, as long as conservatives defend free speech as a neutral, natural state, rather than as a substantive product of our culture's keenest insights and best traditions, we will lose. The radicals recognize that speech rests on an established conception of the good. By failing to recognize this, we're effectively mounting a retreat, leaving radicals to redefine the good and abolish what we call free speech itself. So his idea is that we have something called speech standards, and our conception of free speech isn't some free-for-all, it's a sort of accumulated wisdom of certain standards. What do you make of that?
How is he defining free speech precisely? I mean, is he defining it in the way that we would, which is that, you should have the freedom to say whatever you want without being arrested by the state or prevented to speak by the state, or in the modern world, in the digital age, by big tech, or by societal pressure? Those are the various.
Yeah, from my recollection, he's saying the United States Constitution has free speech, but it also has certain, boundaries on it, like fighting words, for example, which the usual ones we all know, incitement or whatever, fighting words as they're called in the Constitution. So he's saying the Constitution has free speech, First Amendment, but it already within that conception of free speech actually is a moral judgment. It's a set of moral values that aren't completely free, and that we need to defend that against the kind of the woke, and actually say that's really what we're arguing for, is a certain set of values over their set of values.
Interesting. I mean, is he depending there? Is he? What is he trying to root free speech in? Is he saying it's a specifically Western conceptualization? Is that what he means?
I think I could be wrong, but since he's American, they tend to be quite American-centric. I think he's talking about the American conception of it in the Constitution.
Right. Okay. Well. Okay. If we're talking about the First Amendment, we can talk about the First Amendment. So the First Amendment is. It's not. The First Amendment is actually more to do with interference from the state, isn't it? You've got the right to express yourself in whatever way you like, but without the state interfering. So it's a kind of a negative right. I'm just trying to grapple with what precisely he's trying to argue here.
Yeah, well, I just threw an out of context little quote at you, just out of interest. So it's pretty hard to answer. I actually think what he's doing really is it's a conservative bit of rhetoric to appeal to his...
What I'm saying is he trying to own free speech as a conservative principle?
Yes, he's trying to say... And that is a sort of argument, actually, could even be leveled at you, perhaps, that in a way, the conservation of liberalism or of free speech is a kind of conservative small c idea, because, you're not going with the next progressive thing, which, woke would claim it is. You're going, no, we had it right with this thing. That is, in a sense, conservative. So I think he's trying to say, look, we have certain moral values. We're not just... It's not a free-for-all. It never was. So we need to actually defend the... Go on.
No, I'm just going to try and find the exact text of the First Amendment, because I'm interested in refreshing myself on this. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay. So that seems like it is codifying a shared value that has developed through some kind of tradition since the Enlightenment. I think that would be fair to say. I think it is something that builds on the work of Locke and then Mill, and then by the point at which that document is produced, there is a sense of this is our shared value. Whether that's a specifically conservative value, I'm not so sure, because it is advantageous for any party, isn't it? The idea that you can exist in a society within which you are completely free to express yourself and your ideas, even when and especially when those ideas are in conflict. This is why I think where a lot of us have gone wrong is by framing the free speech debate as a left versus right debate, because my belief, and it could be naive, is that it ought to be a non-partisan issue, because it benefits all of us. And even hearing views that are oppositional to our own worldview is a benefit to us as much as it is to them, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I threw you off a bit by, normally you get someone on, they've got a new book out, you ask them about their book, I ask you about someone else's book.
No, that's interesting. Because I haven't read his book, so,
Yeah. I know it's a slight curveball for you.
Well, no,
but I
it's
think,
just it's interesting that you mentioned that because the First Amendment is a negative liberty, so it's freedom from the government to encroach on your values. That changes, doesn't it? I mean, it is worth talking about this because that changes. That means the First Amendment is sort of dated by the time we get to today. Because you say there was that thing about basically they're talking about incitement. They're talking about limits to free speech. Incitement being the most obvious one. And in America, they've got that thing called the Brandenburg test, where do you know about this? The Brandenburg test. So that's the legal test of whether words or someone who has uttered words can be considered responsible for actions that subsequently take place. And it's extremely high threshold. It's to do with, so for instance, the Trump January 6th example by no means meets the Brandenburg test. It's very, very far short of that. I know there were some legal scholars who claimed that it did, but they are, I think, coming from a very partisan perspective on that, wishful thinking kind of thing. So I suppose incitement is a good example of where we all agree that there have to be some kind of limitations on what we call free speech. In the digital age as well, we have the big tech issue, which of course the founding fathers never anticipated. So they're talking about you've got freedom from government interference, but what about this big sprawling, these big sort of plutocrats who own the public square? They never thought of that. So we do have to kind of update these ideas about what free speech means first and foremost, but also how we uphold it and how we defend it. And I do think one of the common misunderstandings of free speech advocates is that what they are doing is being hypocritical. If they say, for instance, it's let's say perjury, you should not be allowed to perjure someone. So they would say you're not really for free speech. Libel is another example. Blackmail, espionage, all of these examples where speech is used to commit a crime. And so free speech advocates will say, well, that should not be allowed. And then and incitement should not be allowed. And then they will say, well, you are now effectively undermining your own absolutist argument. But what free speech advocates are not saying is that in those examples, that is where speech has been used as a mechanism to commit a crime. And what you're punishing there or what you're preventing is not the speech, it is the crime itself. I think I can't remember the exact phrase I use in the book. I can find it. But I say, let me find it because I think this is an important point. I say that speech is to perjury what fire is to arson.
oh yeah, that was a great quote.
Does this make sense? So I think this is a common misunderstanding. They always try and catch you out, don't they? They'll say, oh, well, you know, could we kettle someone and start screaming in their face? But no, because harassment is already illegal. And by preventing that, you're not actually punishing the speech or saying that the speech should be curbed. You can use your speech however you like. But then you go back to the liberal point, which is that as soon as your individual rights, you can exercise your individual rights as much as you like, up until the point that it encroaches on the rights of someone else. It is entirely consistent, I think.
Yeah, I remember that arson quote as being a standout from the book. And just on Brandenburg, it comes from Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969. The court held that the government cannot punish inflammatory speech unless that speech is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. So yeah,
that imminent thing is the really key point. Is that so for instance, if I suppose it would almost have to be like a group of a guy, a demagogue or something, standing there with all of his followers and him pointing at someone and saying, "You must kill that person now," and having whipped them up into a frenzy. You know, like with the Trump situation, no one denies that he was raising the temperature, right? But that does not make him responsible for the people who then crash into the Capitol.
Yeah, and he has all his tweets saying "go home with peace" and all this. Very inconvenient for them. He got them out in the town hall debate just the other night. He goes, "Actually, I've got them right here," and he reads them out. And it's there.
Yeah, and I don't understand why his political opponents would want to pretend otherwise, because what they're effectively doing is mitigating the responsibility of those who committed the actual crime.